Hello, everyone, and welcome to this introduction on the topics of radical collective intelligence. This is both an introduction and a brainstorming session on the same, since for us, the two are kind of inseparable at this point. Anyway, I'm Jamin Shively. I'm happy to be joining you all from Whidbey Island, Washington, and I'm happy to be joined by my colleague and co-host, Michael, who's in Thailand. How you doing there, Michael?
Doing well, Jamin. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Great to see you. So, as always, I'm encouraging two things. Number one, Michael, please jump in anytime, interrupt at any time. It's not an interruption, it's an invitation. And number two, all of you, any of you watching are welcome to join us at any time. Just click on the link that I posted both in just the previous YouTube video that I posted on this very YouTube channel, called, instructions on how to join a Hangout, and then also posted it on my Google Plus and also on my Facebook. So the link is there to see. If you click on it, you will literally be right here with us, and you'll be also part of the recording, part of the broadcast. So
you'll be teleported.
I beg your pardon?
You'll be teleported.
You'll be teleported, exactly. So we're happy to beam you up. Just click on the link. And read the disclaimer. Okay, great. With all that said, let's start with kind of an introduction to what is radical collective intelligence. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share part of the time, and then I'll just pop in and out of screen share. So what is radical collective intelligence? I'm going to start with a quote by Albert Einstein. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Pretty profound statement. Therefore, we need a new level of thinking. And that is exactly what radical collective intelligence intends to be. And radical collective intelligence really consists of three main ingredients. And some of those ingredients have parts to them, so they're really kind of more like buckets of ingredients. But the first big ingredient is the simple concept that just like more batteries make a light bulb brighter, more heads think better than one. This is kind of a mashup between radish and sato hemp. A big retreat we had back in 2015 at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan. Here I am next to my brother Takuya Sato, the Hemperor of Japan. So more heads think better than one. That's the first big ingredient to radical collective intelligence. Now, the next big ingredient is basically artificial intelligence and other technologies applied to that first big ingredient. And let me first just say a couple more things about this. More heads are better than one. So first of all, within the confines of one mind, consider this quote by my friend Nathan Myhrvold. Perspective is worth 30 IQ points. He's talking about the perspective of one individual, right? So perspective inside one single cranium, right? And more perspectives basically just gives you more power, more intellectual power. Well, consider that same principle, but now, instead of being constrained to one single cranium, we allow for the perspectives, plural, from multiple different craniums, as you can see here in this video conference. All these people are participating in one conversation, but they've got all these diverse perspectives. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say about that. Massive boost in IQ. Collective IQ of the collective, to the extent that we
yeah, and before we get deeper,
Yeah.
into it. I just like to point up the name radish, and what we mean by radical. You talked about collective intelligence. More heads is better than one. And then take that human intelligence, cross it with artificial intelligence, right? And you have collective intelligence. As Einstein's quote indicates, we do need a new level of thinking. And radical, coming from the Latin radix, means to get to the root, which shares the same word history as the word radish. They both come from the word root. So I would go so far as to say that new level of thinking is a deeper level. In other words, not superficial solutions to deep rooted problems, but deep solutions. Ones that go that get to the root. So I'll just leave it at that. As sort of an introduction to the very notion of the radical and what radish is all about.
Awesome. Good stuff, Michael. Thank you for that. And to get to the root of our problems, we're, the gist, I'll get back to the ingredient list in a second, but the basic gist of radish is that we're combining or mashing up human intelligence, collective human intelligence, or the intelligence of a collective of humans, a group, and artificial intelligence. So it's a mashup not only of human intelligence and artificial intelligence, but of collective human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So let me just sketch this out. Let me screen share. I kind of want to sketch out a few things, but call me back to video if you ever want to jump right back to video, Michael, or anyone else who joins for that matter. Okie doke. So radical, can you see that, Michael? Radical.
I see it.
Okay, great, thanks. Collective intelligence. Let's just call it RCI. And what we're basically saying is radical collective intelligence is a mashup between collective human intelligence, which I'll just put as CI, collective human intelligence, CI crossed with AI is radical collective intelligence. That's the formula we're using here. All right. So with that, why don't we get back to the ingredient list that I was talking about? What are the ingredients of radical collective intelligence? And like I said, there's three big ingredients. One is, I'll just kind of draw it like this. More heads are better than one head. Let's see. And the second big ingredient, I'm gonna use the well. First of all, actually, for the second big ingredient, let me put it this way. Let me put it in the following terms. So first of all, how do these people express their collective intelligence? Right. This is an example of CI, collective human intelligence. Well, the humans get together and they express their collective intelligence through, drum roll, conversation. They get together and they talk. How about that? And what's really fascinating is that we humans evolved to form this collective intelligence in order to accomplish all kinds of amazing feats and survive against really difficult odds, time and again, by having conversations with each other, around the campfire, for example, or in the cave or whatever. But we would get together and talk. Okay, so the second ingredient of radical collective intelligence has to do with extracting the most informational value from this conversation. So I'm just going to kind of depict it in these terms. Imagine this funnel-like looking machine. Let's just call it the extractor. And what we're trying to do is extractor of information and, in fact, knowledge. You know, not just information, but actual knowledge. And maybe, excuse me, maybe even more good stuff beyond that. I'm getting over a cold, so please pardon my cough. Okay. So all that stuff gets extracted, and you know, what are the means of this extraction? That's the topic of the second ingredient, and I'll just summarize it by the acronym TIM. TIM stands for transcription. So let me just actually make one very important point. In order to extract all this information and knowledge from a conversation, one basic thing that we do to the conversation is that we record it. Just like we're recording this conversation. So we record the conversation, and then of that recording, we apply TIM. The first is transcription. We transcribe the recording into text. Okay? What does I stand for? Indexing. We index the text, and you know, like what Google does. They index web pages and all kinds of documents. And then M stands for mapping. Mapping, and here what we're talking about is mapping not just the text, but the I guess ontology would be the appropriate word, mapping kind of the meaning, right, of the text onto what I'll just call a toposphere. And this toposphere is kind of as it sounds. It's a collection of topics, but it's an organized and structured collection of topics, organized largely, but not necessarily entirely, into taxonomies, as we'll see shortly. So taxonomies of what? Well, we'll have taxonomies of solutions. That's a really big deal, because ultimately that's what radical collective intelligence is about. It's about generating solutions. Solutions to what? To the world's most daunting problems, including but not limited to abrupt climate change. And when we say solutions to abrupt climate change, I just want to be really clear. We don't mean that we're going to completely solve abrupt climate change and make it go away. But what we mean is create, by solutions, we mean those things, those strategies, those programs, those inventions, those engineering solutions, those marketing solutions, any kind of solution, but basically anything that will increase the amount of life that we save on planet Earth as planet Earth goes through this horrific bottleneck that we appear to be at the precipice of abrupt climate change and the acceleration of the sixth mass extinction. So anyway, so that's what we talk about. That's what we mean when we talk about solutions. I'm saying a number of very precise things relatively quickly. So
yeah, and let me just point
please
to a very basic definition of the word intelligence. We can use it thinking we know what we mean by that. I think largely we do. But when asked to define it, sometimes we get stumped. But one basic definition of the word is simply the cognitive ability to solve problems. Kind of a textbook, even dictionary definition of the word intelligence. And so really, it's really that simple, that this platform, this meta platform, RCI, is about the collective, solution, or the solving problems through a collective framework, right? And in doing so, really getting to the root of the problem, and thus being able to root it out or to solve it or whatever.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Michael. So, excuse me. So back to the mapping. So we map the text or the meaning of the text onto the toposphere of topics organized into taxonomies, such as taxonomies of solutions. We'll look at the topics that make up those, and the taxonomy of needs of the whole world. Let's kind of focus on those two initially, but there can be other taxonomies as well, taxonomies of problems, taxonomies of people and organizations, all kinds of taxonomies. And those will be mapped to as well. So really things in the toposphere, a given sentence of, transcribed text from a conversation might be mapped to 20 different things across, 8 different taxonomies, right? So, why do we do all this mapping? We'll get to that in a minute, but I think before we get to that, which is really the subject of the third major ingredient, let me do a bit of a deep dive into taxonomies. Specifically, we're going to be specifically looking at the taxonomy of the needs of a whole world, how we get those needs met, and the way that we get those needs met. And we'll look at another form of taxonomy, which is solutions. We get those needs met through solutions. That's the paradigm or the lens through which we're going to be looking at the next few minutes. And in the process, we're also going to be looking at a methodology for generating solutions, which also enables us to look at gaps in solutions that are in the process of being developed. And it actually points to a systematic, programmatic way for those gaps to be filled, which is really exciting. So anyway, a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. But let me just kind of map out a little bit of a framework before I go from there. So in what follows, we're basically going to look at a taxonomy of needs. What are all the needs that we want to fulfill, right? We call these needs of a whole world, needs of the whole world, right? And there's a multiple entendre to, whole world, a world that's healthy, that's complete, the entire world, etc. And so this taxonomy of needs, we'll see that it's like a tree structure, but it ultimately nets out in a whole bunch of discrete needs, which I'll just indicate as these green little boxes, or in other images, they'll appear as leaves, like the leaves of a tree, right? Okay. So, and then once we have identified, at least conceptually, this long list of needs of a whole world that we want to fill, the whole idea is, fill in the needs, fulfill the needs. So it's like here, see where I'm shading this one need right here, that's half full. Well, it's better if we can make it 80% full, better if we can make it 100% full. So the name of the game is filling the needs, right? Whatever those needs are. Like one of these might be, hunger, filling, making sure everyone has enough to eat. And then we can measure, are we 90% of the way there, 98% of the way there, etc. Okay. How we fulfill these needs, is a really, really interesting question. And we're going to look at a framework which is called brainstorming, pioneered by Dr. Tony McCaffrey and company. And we'll look at an excerpt from a Harvard Business Review video that talks about it. But basically, it takes sort of a need-centric view. It says, okay, to meet this need, what are the different ways in which we could meet that need? And what are the different sort of ways, specific ways, or sub ways underneath these ways? So subways, subways, etc. What are all the different ways and very specific ways that we can meet those needs? And then how do we accomplish that with, and I'm going to put another little matrix here. You can represent it as a one-dimensional matrix. I'll represent it here as a two-dimensional matrix just for fun. But it's a matrix of resources, right? All the different resources that can be applied to building up solutions, combining these resources in different ways to make certain, assemblages or assemblies of resources. And these assemblages can then be combined themselves in different ways to form different, whole solutions. And the whole point of this exercise is to ultimately connect solutions to ways of meeting a need, right? It's kind of that simple. All right, so we're about to make what I just said at a very general high level. We're about to make it more specific. So let's start by, well, first let me start by going back to video and just seeing if you have anything to add to that general picture, Michael.
No, nothing to add to it. Just as a commentary, I think the mapping is so exciting because it's really exploring the possibilities, right? I mean, a map is how you get from one, presumably one of the things it does, the main thing is it helps you to arrive at the destination, right? But there's different kinds of maps also that show you graphically different features, right? You have the territory itself, right? All of its various data points. And imagine the different kinds of maps that can be made, with that data, right? So many different kinds. If you just, want to look at a territory topographically, without cities, roads, whatever, you can look at that. The various biospheres, ecosystems or whatever, and of course the demographics. And there's so many different. I mean, I'm talking about maps as we normally think about them, but this kind of mapping, right, which can take the form of a taxonomy, does the same thing, and it can be mapped in many different ways. Right? And the more data points you have, the more ways it can be mapped. And so that's super exciting stuff.
Yeah. Mapping the different conversations to these different taxonomies. So for example, if that's one kind of mapping. Lots of different kinds of mappings. But what I was talking about in terms of the acronym TIM, which is the second ingredient of radical collective intelligence, transcription, indexing, and mapping. There we're talking about applying transcription, indexing, and mapping of conversations to mapping to taxonomies. So basically saying, all right, these folks are talking, they just had an hour and 20-minute conversation, let's say. We've got it all transcribed and indexed. And now we're mapping what they said to different topics in the different taxonomies. So let me do a screen share just to kind of show what that might look like.
Yeah, and there's one I suppose critique I would make in the form of constructive criticism, and that is, it's not really, I don't really see it as being the meaning that's being mapped. It's not so much the meaning, but certain patterns, right, that are being recognized, both both by humans and, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point, because with that, if you talk patterns, you're not presupposing that the artificial intelligence actually understands.
Yeah, because the meaning is yet another layer on top of that, which gets into the realm of interpretation, which is also very interesting, but that's not necessarily what's being mapped, at least not initially.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay. So going back to the drawing, the sketch here I'm making. All right, so let's say there's a conversation that just happened. The artificial intelligence can then map that conversation to a specific need, or even a whole portion of the tree, which includes that need and perhaps other needs, right? So it's kind of like a whole family of needs that rolls up to some big topic up here, right? Like the needs of a rainforest or something like that, or the needs of all the rainforests of the world. Okay. So, and then this one specific need, how do we achieve that need? How do we fulfill that? So the conversation may highlight maybe only up to this point, and it may talk about a few resources, but this conversation per se, notably, does not include connecting all the so this light blue stuff would essentially be the stuff that's not included in the conversation. The yellow stuff is included in the conversation in this case. So the mapping basically kind of lights up, if you will, those parts of the trees that are included in the conversation. And that, it turns out, is a very interesting fact, as we'll see as we go forward. Okay. So from here, let's go to a PowerPoint presentation where I want to show the needs of a whole world. And this, what we're about to see, is very sort of conceptual. It's not meant to be precise. It's just kind of somewhat of an artistic depiction of the concepts that we're trying to convey. Excuse me. Okay, so the needs of a whole world. And this is just one way to break it down. There's infinite ways, or near infinite number of ways, in which you could break this down into a taxonomy. But imagine that we just break it down into the needs of people and needs of the planet, for people to be whole and for the planet to be whole. And you can imagine, wholeness for people might break down into physical needs, food, shelter, wellness, etc. Higher needs like social and spiritual needs, community, culture, story, purpose, etc. Wholeness for the planet might mean wholeness for air, the atmosphere, wholeness for water, wholeness for land, wholeness for ecosystems and species, etc., etc., etc. And then here's where it gets kind of more artistic, where we just kind of say, okay, imagine, you keep breaking it down and breaking it down to, until you get to the very specific. And the very specific might be, millions or even tens of millions or billions of specific needs that need to be met. And since this is sort of like a tree structure, this is the root, and all the way to the leaves, then the leaves are the individual needs, the specific needs that we were talking about on the drawing right over here, right? So this matrix of green little rectangles maps directly to is this layer of leaves at the very bottom here. Okay. All right. So next, what I want to talk about is the meeting of a specific need, and here's where I'm going to bring in the topic of brain swarming. This is just one example of how, in formulating radical collective intelligence, we have unabashedly incorporated whole other technologies, methodologies like, transcription of, voice to text, for example. We just incorporate that. Brainstorming, we're pretty much incorporating it as is because it's just a really tight methodology. And to show what that methodology is, I'm going to do a screen share again and just play like a little over a minute of a video from a Harvard Business Review video about brainstorming, narrated by Dr. Tony McCaffrey, who is the inventor of brainstorming to our knowledge. Okay, so let me do screen share. Ta-da. And brainstorming. Okay, so here we're going to look at the brainstorming methodology and an example of it. Okay, this will be probably closer to 2 minutes of playtime. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this 2-minute introduction to brainstorming.
This idea is probably best explained using an example from the lives of insects. Ants solve problems by leaving signals in their environment that influence the behavior of the others. When searching for food, successful ants leave traces of pheromones along their trails, a signal to the other ants that there's a path to dinner. If we make a problem-solving graph, then humans can quietly leave their signals, that is, their ideas, for others to build upon. In a brainstorming graph, the goal grows downward into refined sub-goals. Resources are interacted together and grow upward. When the two directions connect, solutions start to emerge.
And by the way, this is one important thing. He calls these sub-goals, I call them ways. They are ways to achieve the goal. So when we talk radical collective intelligence, when he says sub-goals, think ways or subways.
Let's see how brainstorming would handle a classic management problem, like this real-life conundrum at the company Pacific Power and Light. Winter storms in the Cascade Mountains leave power lines loaded with ice, which if left unattended will break the lines. Having workers climb the poles to shake the lines is both dangerous and time-consuming. Management searched for a better method for years. What if they had used brainstorming? To start, they would simply place the goal at the top of the brainstorming graph and a few known resources at the bottom. Then the group would be instructed not to talk, but to simply add post-it notes and drawn lines to the graph. People who are naturally top-down thinkers would start refining the goal. Other naturally bottom-up thinkers would analyze how the resources could be used, or they would add new resources.
He's saying a lot in a short period of time. I just want to pause for a moment and point out. So what's in these orange boxes? These are different ways to achieve the goal of removing ice from the power lines. You can shake the lines. You can prevent the ice from being formed in the first place. You can warm the lines to melt it off. And then underneath those three big ways are what I call sub-ways. They are, ways to achieve this way. So physical contact to shake the lines, loud sound to shake the lines, etc. Okay, and then at the bottom are resources, which can be applied or combined, emphasis on combination to achieve these different ways of achieving that goal.
Pretty soon, the two directions would connect, an indication that the group is finding ways to use the resources to solve the problem. This figure shows a careful refinement of the goal, as well as Pacific Power and Light's actual solution of using the helicopter's downdraft to shake the lines enough to remove the ice.
Okay, so that's one resource, the helicopter, applied in this way, this subway, and this sub-subway. Another way would be prevent the ice from forming by applying chemical treatment to the lines. And that would be achieved through a combination of helicopter and de-icer in that case. But more generally, and here I want to go to sketching. So from this plane of resources, we might combine different resources here to form an assembly, different resources over here to form a different assembly of resources over here. And then these three might be combined to form yet another assembly, which in turn combines with yet another assembly over here and another assembly over here. And then the three of those combine, so you can have this whole very complex assemblage of resources and assemblages of resources to create, a solution, right? And then, that solution might be custom designed to solve this one problem over here, for example. But let's just consider, the case of like, a helicopter using, dumping chemicals on the lines, for example. Yes, that might solve the problem of de-icing that power line, but it might also cause other problems. For example, noise pollution. Affecting multiple different species. You might have chemical pollution affecting aquifers and affecting air quality and who knows what else, right? So these red lines indicate unintended consequences which may impact positively or negatively multiple different needs, right? So these needs are impacted by this, I'm going to put quote unquote solution, because, some of the solutions may actually cause more problems than they solve, right? So, but this is really kind of the big picture of how we're, this is this one paradigm, this one perspective of looking at meeting needs through solutions, which in turn are combinations of resources. And by the way, the resources could be natural resources, human resources, technical resources, tools, fuel, anything, anything that can be measured. So with this perspective, now let's introduce kind of a really interesting sort of hypothetical view of all this, which is, what if you've got the, so down here is your whole resource matrix. And let's say that, people are already talking about creating this assembly of resources, this other assembly of resources, and they just kind of have a vague idea of the kinds of resources that might be needed from some realm over here, but they're nowhere near as specific as these other assemblages of resources over here, right? And so imagine that there are conversations that talk about all of this, but they don't, let me put it this way. Imagine that there's a conversation that just got recorded and transcribed, and it got mapped to this topic, the topic of this assemblage of resources, this one, and this one here, but even this one is deemed to be incomplete because it's missing, this other piece over here. And so the artificial intelligence, the mapping functions of the artificial intelligence would be able to identify all this, and it would also be able to identify that this conversation is also talking about meeting this need and this other need and this other need through this solution. So it's really a solution designed to pick off, multiple needs with one stone, so to speak. So the mapping function would be able to identify that all these topics are under discussion in this conversation, but missing from the conversation is this whole piece over here that we are representing in light blue, right? So imagine then that there's a whole, And so let's just call this conversation that, let me just kind of draw a lasso around it and say this conversation that addresses all this stuff in green is conversation A, right? Conversation A. Meanwhile, let's say that there's a conversation B that addresses the remaining portion, right? That's not addressed in conversation A. So, and here we get to really the third big ingredient of radical collective intelligence, which is the connection capability. And so the artificial intelligence, actually one of our colleagues came up with a name for this today called Amy, A-I-M-Y, Amy. So Amy is sort of, we're sort of conceiving of her as kind of this just uber smart, all-knowing within the realm of collective intelligence and the taxonomies and the conversations, executive assistant who will identify that, hey, conversation A is talking about all this, conversation B is basically talking about its complement or what's missing, which is really kind of the gap relative to conversation A. And Amy, the AI layer, would then basically make this connection and say, hey, you all in conversation A should be talking to you all in conversation B, right? You know, that's kind of a relatively simple case. Let's look at a slightly more complex case. And please jump in anytime, Michael, because I know I'm talking about a lot of different topics that are related. But here's another example. So let's say you've got a need over here that's well identified and some ways are identified. And, you know, this is now part of the, you know, the taxonomy of needs and solutions. This is ways to fulfill that need. And then meanwhile, on the resource side, you've got various different resources and combinations of these resources into what's, you know, what could be a solution. And then you also have sort of like a conversation of a possible solution that could emerge from, you know, resources like these and other resources like these being combined that would actually fulfill upon this way being achieved to meet ultimately this need, right? So basically, through the mapping process, the AI of Tim, the second ingredient, transcription, indexing, and mapping, would map conversations, identify and map conversations to these topics in the taxonomy of resources and combinations or assemblages of resources. And it would identify that there are other conversations that talk generally about using these types of resources and assemblages thereof for achieving this way of meeting this need. But it's still kind of, you know, a general conversation, right? And through pattern matching, we want for the, you know, for the TIM layer of artificial intelligence, the second ingredient of radical collective intelligence, we want the TIM layer of AI to be able to distinguish between a conversation about a possible solution versus a specific specification of the actual components of a solution. And so this general conversation would basically, the fact that it's general and not specific would be an indication that there's a gap here that's beckoning to be filled between, you know, the very specifics of these specific resources and these specific assemblages of resources into, say, tools or processes or whatever. There's a gap that potentially could be filled between those resources and assemblages and this very specific way of fulfilling this need. And so to the extent that this need is, say, a high priority need, as indicated by the color red, then Amy, the different AI layer, the third ingredient of radical collective intelligence, as an executive assistant, could basically say, okay, because this need up here is such a high priority need, I'm going to prioritize the pulling together of people, in some cases whole organizations, to come together and talk about this gap and see if they can fill this gap, because I can see that we're getting close. Amy would see that, with much help from Tim, the two would talk with each other, that, hey, we're getting pretty close between a really solid understanding of the way that would be required to meet this need and the resources that are available to fulfill upon that way of meeting that need. And so Amy might reach out to the participants in all the conversations that talk about this topic of this assemblage of resources, this other topic of this assemblage, this other topic of this resource, et cetera, et cetera. She might hit all these people that are talking about that, as well as the people who are involved in the conversations talking about this specific way, as well as the people who are talking about this need. Now, through pattern matching, she'll figure out really the best subset of all those people to bring together to convert this general conversation, and also the people, of course, who've had that general conversation. They'll be very high priority for this new hookup that Amy will be connecting people to make that, to turn that from a general conversation to a specific conversation that actually bridges the gap and says, now we've got a very specific mapping from specific resources and specific assemblages thereof, or byproducts thereof, through whatever further assemblages of those assemblages need to happen. See, this is where we make it specific, including other resources that need to be, pulled in and combined, right? To say, aha, now this specific combination of resources, boom, applied in this way, fulfills on this way, right? So that's kind of the big picture of, ingredient number 2, which is Tim, and ingredient number 3, which is Amy. So, that is kind of the fastest and yet somewhat deep introduction to radical collective intelligence that we've cooked up so far. So we A, wanted to share that with you all, and B, get your input, get your, is that clear? Is it confusing? Does it make sense? And then also I want to, brainstorm it with Michael and anyone else who wishes to join, what we think about all this and how do we take it to the next level. So right now in the development of Radish, we are building out the conversational capabilities, better ways to organize conversations, series of conversations, transcriptions of conversations, mapping, and all that. That's really where our focus is right now. And we haven't done anything yet with the artificial intelligence layers other than conceive of them and speculate about, scenarios such as the ones that we've just shown pictures of. So much still needs to be done, but we really want to use the collective intelligence of the whole community, all of you watching this, to weigh in and, give us your best ideas, questions, challenges, etc. And when we're ready, we can shift gears and take a look at the different needs of a whole world, the different actual needs of a whole world, and different solutions for achieving those needs. But first, I need to take a little break. I kind of feel like I've been talking nonstop for a while. So let me take a little compassionate break. If you have anything to say, Michael, please jump in now or at any time. But I'm just going to take a 2 or 3 minute break.
Sure. Very good overview. I'll see you back in what, 5 minutes?
Yeah, that sounds great. 5 minutes. So we'll just kind of mute out our cameras. And so just kind of, if you're watching this video, go ahead and just kind of drag forward until you see our faces again on video. Okay. Thanks, Michael, and thanks all. See you in 5 minutes. Okay, I am back. Um,
Yeah.
Welcome back, Michael. Welcome back, everyone. Okay. So just to kind of recap, we've identified three main ingredients of radical collective intelligence. That more heads are better than one, bringing more perspective and therefore more combined intelligence. And then number two, the acronym TIM, transcription, indexing, and mapping. Mapping to what? To topics within taxonomies. Topics of needs, topics of solutions, topics of resources. And then number three, Amy, sort of the connecting capability to connect different people, groups, conversations, even bots, bots, BOT, to, and lots of other different resources and assets to fill in the gaps of knowledge in terms of either completing solutions or completing ways in which solutions can be applied, right? Very specific ways, custom ways to apply a given existing solution or modified solution, right? So there's all kinds of...
Yeah. Remind me, Jamin, what does the acronym AMY stand for?
It's not, the AI stands for artificial intelligence, and then MY, just like my AI, my assistant kind of thing.
Okay.
Right. Got my virtual assistant. But really, it would be a whole AI layer that would be everyone's assistant. So why don't we now take a look at sort of a list of kind of different realms of solutions, which is a taxonomy, or the beginning of a taxonomy of solutions. So let me just get that ready. Okay. All right. So let me do screen share here. Here it goes. Okay. So realms of solutions. Starting with what I think is the most urgent solution that needs to be developed, or set of solutions, and that is for the protection and restoration of ice, and specifically Arctic ice. We need to basically refreeze the Arctic urgently for a number of reasons that we talk about in other recent Hangouts. Another realm of solution is the capture and sequestration of greenhouse gases. Another realm of solutions is the realm of geoshading, which is related to, but not identical to, protection and restoration of ice. Protection and cleaning of oceans, protection and restoration of ecosystems generally, holistic land management, which has a lot of overlap with protection and restoration of ecosystems, particularly land-based ecosystems, holistic aquifer management, etc. And then, so these realms of solutions are really solutions focused on protecting and healing Mother Earth. And then there are other realms of solutions which are really more about the human layer of Mother Earth, and solutions that together will bring about economic transformation, political transformation, cultural transformation, transformation in our entire set of living arrangements, such that together these transformations in humanity, which are mostly TBD, will help orchestrate and affect the the creation of these other solutions in all these other realms pertaining to Mother Earth. So, for example, within economic transformation, I believe that a huge chunk of our economy should be reoriented towards achieving all of these, with particular urgency, again, on protecting and refreezing Arctic ice so that we don't lose that giant mirror at the top of the planet, which reflects away so much sunlight, particularly in the summertime. If we lose that mirror, then that's predicted that would be the tipping point that would cause runaway heating, and that would just be totally unstoppable at that point and just put us on a multi-degree centigrade staircase to hell on Earth that we probably wouldn't survive as humanity. And so that's why that makes that so urgent. But anyway, so these are realms of specific solutions. Then there's also the topic of meta solutions. What's a meta solution? My attempt at a quick and dirty definition is the set of all any of strategies, systems, programs, organizations, which are designed to generate solutions. The key word is generate. So, for example, radish.org is designed to generate solutions. And a whole realm of meta solutions is radical collective intelligence, which radish.org is the pioneer of. Other meta solutions include governments, which have mostly been a failure, universities, think tanks, nonprofits and other NGOs, political parties, private sector, religious sector. I would also add the whole set of blockchain technologies and related technologies. Anyway, they're myriad meta solutions or generators of solutions. And, we're focusing right now on radical collective intelligence. So let me show some more images while we're at it. Let me just kind of see where we're going with this. Okay. Well, let me just talk a little bit about the big promise of radical collective intelligence. So as you can, well, here, let me just kind of show this one slide because it's kind of beautiful. So like a given solution, let's say, an electric car, right? Or just a car generally in this case. The car solution, I mean, it's the solution to many problems. Of course, it's caused many more problems than it's solved. But that's not the point of this slide. The point of this slide is to show what's the acronym BOM, or Bill of Materials. This kind of shows this Bill of Materials explosion of this solution into its major assemblages. And those assemblages consist of multiple different parts, which here are represented as leaf nodes. And so that's, just kind of a more understandable picture of the concept of assemblages that I was talking about before. Now, the big promise of radical collective intelligence is that it can evolve, right? And so here's how. We're talking about how, look, radical collective intelligence can be applied to any one of those realms of solutions that I was talking about, including the realm of, and this may sound like I'm trying to do a magic trick, but just stay with me. It can be applied to the realm of, refreezing Arctic ice. It can be applied to the realm of cleaning up the oceans, whatever. It can also be radical collective intelligence can also be applied to the realm of, drumroll, developing radical collective intelligence itself. In other words, this new form of intelligence can be used to build out an even more powerful form of itself. It's like a robot redesigning itself, or the next version of itself, right?
As the Chinese proverb has it, it takes one axe to make another.
Exactly. It takes one axe to make another. And Chinese proverbs, one of the beautiful things about Chinese proverbs is they're incredibly concise. But as soon as you say that, it starts you thinking, about making a better axe, and then that better axe can be used to make an even better axe, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, and I would want to go so far as to say that, and sorry for the background noise, that Radish.org as a radical collective intelligence platform exists on yet another meta level, right, from the other meta levels that you indicated. And what I mean by that is, one way to look at that is those meta solutions, right, that deal with a certain set of problems, right? But collective intelligence, especially a radical form of it, I think is dealing with sets of sets. It's almost like operating at a meta level that we don't want to, go too far down that wormhole. But it's not just concerned with this or that set of problems, and it's certainly not just concerned with solving a problem, right? But it's kind of the ultimate aggregator.
yeah, totally, and we'll get to that. I'm really glad you brought that up. Let's make sure that we get to that aggregation function and the holistic perspective feature set or functionality set of radical collective intelligence. But first, I want to get back to this really sexy and cool promise, the promise of radical collective intelligence, which is its evolution, right? So, but the basis of it is this, that we essentially use radical collective intelligence to design better and better versions of itself. And the better the version, the better the feature set, for lack of a better word, the better the feature set of radical collective intelligence, the more powerful the actual intelligence that it'll be able to support, right? As represented by this kind of weird looking brain image, okay? So that brain represents the, let's just call it the actual IQ of the radical collective intelligence of the entire community working together. And then, just to show graphically what we're talking about here is this actual collective intelligence, which sits atop the platform. See, the platform itself is just software, right? Software and data. The actual intelligence is the entire community working on that platform, working within that platform, with the Tim layer doing the transcription, indexing, and mapping, and the Amy layer making connections between people, and then they get together and then they have new conversations and those are indexed and yada, yada, yada. And it's just, an ongoing cycle of intelligence, but and it's able to accomplish quite a lot. But it's still constrained by the characteristics and features and capabilities of the platform itself. So now, using this intelligence to build the next generation of the platform, right? Bigger, more powerful, better, right? Then it stands to reason that will be able to support an even larger actual intelligence, actual collective intelligence, right? And then this now super powerful, actual intelligence will then be used to help design and build, drum roll, the next version of radical collective intelligence platform of radish.org, basically, which in turn will support a much bigger actual intelligence, and away we go. So it has the promise of exponential growth. Right?
Yeah, I was just about to say it's a proportional response to the exponential the change, right? Rate of change of climate change. right? It's a
Yeah.
proportional response. I mean, if climate change, the rate of change itself is accelerating, so it's exponentially getting worse. You know, just imagine an ice cube melting. The smaller it gets, the faster it melts, right? So so it better be exponentially growing. Collective intelligence.
Exactly. And that point is exactly the point that I make in the next slide, which is that proportional response. You see, right now you could think of abrupt climate change as like this car that's just barreling down the Nevada desert, aiming right towards us, ready to run us over. Well, we now finally have a contender to that car, and that is, you know, radical collective intelligence. So now it's about to become a cosmic game of chicken between abrupt climate change speeding up exponentially and radical collective intelligence growing exponentially. Obviously, in the game of chicken, we want the bad guys to veer off the road and go end over end, and then, you know, blow up in a cloud of, you know, smoke and flames. But anyway, I showed this picture just to show this game of chicken between these two cars. That's what it is. It's a contender. It's a proportional response to the existential threat of abrupt climate change. And so, and oh yeah, I also want to show these slides for sure. Is, you know, back to the needs of a whole world and this whole, you know, set of leaf nodes at the bottom, and then pointing to brainstorming, how the two connect is like this. So the, you know, one of these leaf nodes of the needs of a whole world is the need to remove ice from power lines, right? So it maps to this need, you know, this is the need, and that maps to these ways, which map to these subways, which map to these sub-subways, and then resources are combined to form solutions to, you know, meet those needs. Okay, that's for one particular need. But of course, we have multiple needs. And so really, you just imagine conceptually for every one of these needs pointing to one, possibly more than one, you know, kind of clusters or taxonomies of ways, subways, all the way down to solutions, and then down to the resources at the roots of those solutions. And let me just point out that that these red lines here are conceptually to represent, okay, whatever solution was generated here that was the winning solution for meeting that need, it also generates some unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences can be positive, negative, or neutral. Okay. So this now leads to a big picture that I'd like to draw on the whiteboard, just to make it a bit clearer and also to show how we're going to kind of integrate it all together per what I understood to be your previous comments, Michael. And so, you know, we have the needs of a whole world, you know, those break into people and planet, or however we break them down, into this whole, you know, ultimately this whole needs matrix down here, right? All these leaf node needs. And then each of those needs maps to different, you know, different ways in which those solutions, different ways in which those needs can be met, subways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then now from down here in the resource realm, the realm of resources, before I represented it as a two-dimensional thing, now I'll just do it as a one-dimensional thing just to make it easier. So different resources are combined to form different assemblages. Those assemblages are combined to form different, you know, solutions. And in fact, you can combine, why not? You can combine different solutions together to form other solutions, right? You can hook up a trailer to a tractor and have a tractor trailer, okay, et cetera, et cetera. All right, and then ultimately these solutions connect the dots, right? And ultimately it looks sort of like, looks kind of like a bolt of lightning, right? You know, you've got a need, a way, a subway, a sub-subway that connects to a solution, which in turn is made up of all these other, you know, solutions and parts thereof. So it's kind of like a bolt of lightning that breaks apart at the end into sort of a pyramid. This is, you know, how this need got met. Now, here's what's fascinating. If you include all of the unintended consequences, which I'll draw in red, but these unintended consequences could be positive, negative, or neutral. And just like we talked about before, a given solution, like, you know, say permaculture in a city, may actually address multiple different needs. It provides food, it provides jobs, it sequesters carbon, it reduces noise pollution, it yada, 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 yada. It, you know, it has all these different positive benefits. So really, you could think of the solution as sort of like a grand crossroads between a whole bunch of resources that got assembled to meet a whole bunch of different needs, right? In the most complex of cases. Or it could, you know, or it could be a much simpler situation of a much simpler solution that just uses one resource to meet one need, and that's the end of that, right? So it's all the above. But the beauty of looking at it holistically is you can imagine that through all of our tinkering, we can invent a whole bunch of different solutions that I'll just kind of conceptually draw here as a bunch of little S's with squares around them. So we come up with all these different solutions that, oh, well, this one can solve this problem. Well, this one can solve these 10 problems. Yeah, but that one consumes all these resources and has all these unintended negative consequences. Yeah, but it's also more efficient. Well, blah, 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 you know. So, you know, each of these solutions with their champions, their backers saying, hey, you know, we want to promote this. Maybe you own the patent for that solution or something. Or maybe you just created it and, you know, you want to see your baby succeed or whatever. Well, consider that to help us kind of resolve all this, and also to help us keep track of all the different resources and how much are consumed by different solutions, and ultimately to check and see that we fulfill all these different needs, it would help very much to have a capability which I'm going to give a name to, which is called the Global Holistic Model. Okay. And the Global Holistic Model, just like the name suggests, is basically a holistic model of Mother Earth and all of her land masses, oceans. You could just think of it as just a super detailed computer model, which it ultimately must be. A super detailed
it's like
model.
Yeah,
go ahead, I'll go to Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, sorry, I don't have my headphones in, so I'll get close here. It's like Mother Earth's motherboard, like a motherboard for Mother Earth.
Sure, yeah. Mother Earth, motherboard. There you go. Mother Earth aboard. Anyway, Mother Earth's board. It's the Mother Earth's board. Okay. So back to the screen share. All right. And basically what we want to do is use this model to be able to say, okay, global holistic model, GHM. Okay, global holistic model. If we input a given solution into the model, tell us what will be basically the output. What do we mean by output? Well, you know, basically, how many needs got met, right? and also how many needs got, got botched up, right? Because, of unintended consequences. So think of this whole thing, both, successes and failures and partial successes. We need a name for this. Let's call it the I don't know, the scorecard. I don't really like the card part of it, but scorecard, spectrograph of, of the impact of basically the impact of impacts, plural, of the solution, right? What are the impacts? And then another thing that we're going to want to know is what are the impacts on resources, right? How many of these different resources got consumed in order to, fully implement this solution? And then consider that once we have the information for all such solutions, and the global holistic model can model, and it can also model different combinations, give me 80% implementation of this solution, 10% implementation of this other solution, 30% implementation, any exotic mixes of solutions, and what are the total impacts, right? Again, impacts on needs and impacts on resources. Okay, all right. If we can do this for any combination of solutions, we can do this for, well, let me just cut to the chase. What we can basically do is build an optimization layer around the global holistic model, which I'll just represent in blue here. We build an optimization layer around the global holistic model. And the job of that optimization layer is very simple. Keep testing and keep testing and keep testing and keep testing and keep testing different combinations of solutions until you find that combination of solutions which gives you the optimal set of impacts. Meaning, on the positive side, we meet all the needs of a whole world. And on the negative side, on resource impact, we basically, utilize resources in the most efficient way to meet all of our needs. In the optimistic, scenario that we can meet all of our needs. Now, again, this is called the optimization layer, right? And actually, I spent a few years of my life early in my career and in graduate school, becoming somewhat of an expert in certain areas of optimization, namely the optimization of large and complex manufacturing and logistics networks. For example, I led the team that created the software and the internal consulting to optimize Cemex, the most profitable cement company in the world, based in Mexico. That was back in the late 90s. Anyway, so we create an optimization layer to find the optimal mix that will determine the optimal mix of solutions. That's the holy grail. What's the optimal mix of solutions to either meet all of our needs, or if we can't meet them all, meet the most critical needs first, to the best we can, to the best of our ability, and meet as many, think of all the needs of a whole world, and having sort of a weighting function so that you can say, look, we're prioritizing saving life on Earth, as much diversity of life as possible, et cetera, et cetera. And we talk extensively about, what our goals are and what we want to achieve in other videos. But it's the optimization layer basically uses really cool artificial intelligence technologies combined with modeling technologies for the global holistic model, to just find the optimal mix of solutions that'll get us as close to total success as possible, with emphasis on saving and preserving that which is deemed most valuable. Life itself is the most valuable thing, and the most diversity of life that we can save is better. More diversity is better than less diversity. All that I'm kind of hand waving describing right now would be baked into a very specific quantified objective function that would run across all species and ecosystems and life supporting systems, and basically maximize the positive outcome. And even in a case where the range of possible outcomes are all very bleak, well, you find the least bleak of those in the range of possibles, and you go for that, right? In other words, optimization doesn't promise to give you the best of all. It doesn't promise to give you the best world. It promises to give you the best of all possible worlds. And, you know, the realm of possible worlds or possible futures for planet Earth is heavily constrained by the realities of abrupt climate change and just how badly we've damaged the life supporting systems of Mother Earth. That's just reality. It is what it is. So our possible futures are constrained. Whatever those constraints are, let's go for the most positive shade of gray that we can possibly achieve within those shades of gray of realms of possibility. Back to you, Michael. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry about that. Okay.
No. Sorry, my mic was muted. I didn't know. So it may be the case that a quote unquote whole world is impossible, right? Whole world represents the horizon, right? Or ultimate, you know, goal, right? Shooting for the stars. But the optimal over time eventually should show us what is possible, right? Whatever that optimal state turns out to be. And I imagine no matter, you know, what it turns out to be, it'll be a lot better than it is today.
I don't know about better than today, but see, because right now, you know, you've got a lot of people eating and breathing and drinking water and all that. It's projected that things will get a lot worse over the.
Oh, that's a good point. It's also possible that it'll be worse than today, but not as bad as it would otherwise be.
That's the point. That's the point. Not as bad as it otherwise be. Because see, if we just completely let go of the steering wheel and just let ourselves continue on the path that we're on, then it's predictable that we'd have collapse of civilization as the planet heats up and as agriculture breaks down, mass starvation, all kinds of violence, conflicts, wars, and ultimately just Mad Max. And most of humanity would die off. And tragically, hundreds of nuclear power plants would all basically go Fukushima within a relatively tight window, you know, given the vagaries of abrupt climate change, weather, extreme weather, storms, hurricanes, etc. Okay, so all those hundreds of nuclear power plants going Fukushima around the world would produce enough radiation, that harmful radiation that would actually fry the atmosphere and leave us with an atmosphere-free, dead, hot, dry, radioactive planet. Nothing like the life abundant Mother Earth that we know and love today. So we definitely don't. So if we just took our hands off the tiller and said, we're not going to even try to make any solutions of any kind, then, you know, it's predictable that that would happen. And, you know, the end state would just be absolutely beyond tragic. It would be tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. resulting in no life on Earth and no possibility of life on Earth ever again. That's quite a heavy burden for us to take to our graves. And so rather than let that happen, let's come up with all the solutions that we need to shut down nuclear power plants around the world, even after civilization collapses. Well, how would we do that? One answer is build arcologies co-located next to all the nuclear power plants around the world, staffed with the people, the tools, equipment, spare parts, fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to safely shut down those nuclear power plants, however many years it takes, and to store the nuclear material, nuclear waste, raw material, spent fuel rods, unspent fuel rods, you name it, safely store all that like in big concrete, pits with layers of all kinds of different layers, from geotextiles to soils to concrete to synthetics, you name it. In fact, we'd probably build those pits. See, we need to build those pits now. We need to build those arcologies now. And we talk about this in other videos on this same channel. That's an example of some of the solutions that the optimization layer would prioritize for and say, let's make darn sure that we build out this whole network of arcologies to safely shut down nuclear and dodge the massive bullet called, Fukushima times 440, right? Let's get it down to Fukushima times 10 or Fukushima times 5 if we can get it down that low. Ideally we want Fukushima times 0. And that's the direction that the optimizer will strive towards, and it'll get as close as it gets, right? And of course, the better the solutions that we cook up for shutting down nuclear. And that's where we need to really innovate. And what better context for innovation than radical collective intelligence? You see, it all goes together. And once we have the possibility of exponentially growing radical collective intelligence, we have the possibility of exponentially growing solutions to shut down nuclear, to refreeze the Arctic, to do geoshading generally, to clean up the oceans, to sequester carbon, to sequester methane, to capture methane and utilize it for various reasons. All this methane is bubbling up out of the oceans and out of the permafrost. Basically, we're operating in the paradigm of separation and individuality and ego and hoarding. We're imparting maximum destruction to Mother Earth while constraining our collective intelligence, our aggregate intelligence, at a very, very low level. This very reptilian, violent state that our minds have gotten into. As we make the shift to radical collective intelligence, as more and more people join radical collective intelligence, there will be, in addition to a transformation in intelligence, there will be a spiritual transformation as we come together as one humanity. And the solutions would blow away any, normal human being of today, right? But for the radical collective intelligence that is itself constantly exponentially growing, I don't really see any end in sight, because all the different layers will continually be improved. All the artificial intelligence layers, the modeling layers, the optimization layer, all layers will be improved simultaneously. And so we're going to come up with solutions that are so elegant, so powerful, so resource efficient. It'll blow everyone away. And then it'll just keep getting smarter and more powerful and more efficient. And so if we can just get ahead of the wave of abrupt climate change and actually put even more distance between ourselves and the wave by buying time, by refreezing the Arctic and doing other vital things that we can do like that, and also implementing political, social, cultural, and living arrangement solutions so that we stave off war and riots and other forms of violence, Anything's possible. Let's quit saying impossible and let's start embracing the reality of the possibility of radical collective intelligence, and then let's get on board. We need you. We need everyone to jump in and participate in radical
join us or die.
Thank you, Michael. That's pretty much it. Now, there's so many topics we could talk about from here. Let me just tell you one that I was brainstorming about today, because part of this is brainstorming, and this kind of shows how we're constantly tinkering with and expanding what's possible within radical collective intelligence. Okay, so normally we talk about the TIM layer, transcription, indexing, and mapping, applied to conversations that happen within, the Radish platform, like this conversation. Okay. What if we turned TIM loose on literally all content in the world, all written content, all documentaries, all magazine articles, Wikipedia pages, New York Times articles, scientific journal articles, government documents that are accessible, WikiLeaks, you name it. Just turn TIM loose. So TIM goes around, indexing.
Tim Cook went AWOL.
That's it. When Tim Cook went AWOL. So Tim goes around and maps everything to this growing and evolving taxonomy of topics, of solutions, of needs, of ways, of et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then what's really exciting there is then Amy's gonna then take a look at that and say, oh wow, okay, got it. All right, so we got gaps here, here, and here, and here. All right, we got some general discussions about filling in these gaps. All right, let me take some of these people from these general discussions and connect them with some of the engineers looking at combining resources from below, combined with some of the analysts who are looking at the different ways in which these needs can be met. And hey, you should talk to you, should talk to you. So Amy does her job connecting everybody. And, voila, we start filling in the gaps with the requisite solutions to meet those needs. In other words, Radish could do its job as sort of like this Radish layer spread over the world of all content, right? And then just start connecting people and saying, you guys should talk, and we'll be listening, right?
This is that part of the movie where Tim Cook leaves Apple and joins Radish.
Exactly. No, you see, people are going to be joining Radish in droves, particularly at the beginning, because can you imagine being Radish member number 17 and then Radish member number 55, right? Versus Radish member number 4,382,917,426, right? There's a bit of a difference there. It's better to be first than it is to be better. So I predict that because of that, look, unless there's some other just amazing hyper technology that we're not even aware of, I think radical collective intelligence is it. And because Radish is leading the way, we'll,
yeah, and it's more, and it's like you pointed out before, Jamin, it's much more than a technological innovation. It is that, right? But that's not the beating heart of Radish.
No, the beating heart of Radish is revolution. It's radical revolution, right? Because all this is revolutionary. We're talking about revolutionary evolution.
It's the throbbing utopian impulse.
The hot, throbbing utopian impulse. That's Radish. Exactly. The red, hot, throbbing utopian impulse. Thank you. That's it. And so, and it will just be ejaculating solutions constantly and then those will then get analyzed and optimized, and new optimal sets of solutions will constantly, so there will always be a new optimal as new solutions are being developed.
It's a virtual cybergasm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And we talked about Doctors in Utopia, and I coined the term massgasm, right? It's like the gasm that's created when the masses get together and use our collective intelligence and our collective power. So really, humanity. I'm talking to all humanity here. This is a publicly broadcast, recorded video. It's up to us how fast we want to embrace and accelerate this reality. If we want to kind of say, that sounds interesting, but I'll just kind of wait and see. Look, we could all play wait and see on this. No, and it's just, a couple dozen of us who are really, who really make up Radish. Just kind of tinker along, and not really, it doesn't really get anywhere, because we need a critical mass of experts and expertise in order to really get this going. And we need people to help us build out the remaining components and suggest which components we should be integrating. There's a perfect example of a contribution that someone can make using the very platform of Radish. That it can take them 10 seconds to say, hey, you should be incorporating this, and this is how, and this is why. Wow, that can make all the difference. So as fast as we want to come together and build this platform out and generate all the solutions that we need to first buy us some time, then buy us some more time, refreeze the Arctic, clean up the oceans, do all these vital steps, take this forward so many iterations, and we could have a future dramatically different than the one that, the rather bleak future that folks like Guy McPherson are predicting. Anything's possible. How fast do we want to move on this? So it's really up to you who are watching this video to make that choice for yourself. Do I want to sit on the sidelines and watch the world go down, or do I want to jump into one of these really radically creative, revolutionary projects and make a difference and help change history? Going on mute.
Well, there's a whole spectrum between the worst case scenario, right, which we need to be very aware of, right, wary of, represented by Guy McPherson, and then this whole optimization, this optimal outcome, whatever that looks like, and I suppose the worst case scenario is the two are the same thing, right? But I think most of us are, we're smoking the hopium, right? And we're saying, the utopian impulse is urging me towards life, living, survival, right? Surviving and thriving, right? And so that's what's pushing us forward. There's a pull. And I think it's that more than anything else that's gonna get people involved in this radical form of collective intelligence, because it just represents, a higher form of life, or maybe even, the survival of life on Earth. Right? That's what it represents. That's its silos.
That's it. And so the reality is we don't know the true range of possible futures that we could be heading into. And and there's all these just really amazing fields of like consciousness hacking, reality hacking, consciousness shifting reality. And this could all be a part of it for all that we know. In fact, why not use radical collective intelligence to help figure out those realms and how to apply them, you know, and solutions from within those realms. So I just thought of a cool sort of tagline, you know, for Radish, among many others. But the one I just thought of is the Hopium Den. Come join the Hopium Den.
There we go. Yeah. Why not? Smoke the hopium.
Smoke some hopium. Come smoke some hopium with us. So, in fact,
just don't say no. Just don't say no.
In fact, that should be a brand of cannabis that we sell only in our Diego Pellicer stores. Hopium. Hopium. And it should be a strain, a variety of cannabis that you know, that really puts you in an optimistic, you know, state. And that, you know, so it's kind of like, anyway.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, hopium. Only available at Diego Pellicer. It doesn't actually exist. I'm just speculating. But yeah. Hopium. What a name. And we'll grow the hopium in Hoquiam, Washington. H-O-Q, Hoquiam. Near Aberdeen, out near the coast. Wow. So yeah, you know, welcome to Radical Collective Intelligence. Join the conversation. We'll be having other conversations that we'll post on radish.org, and that you can join or watch or whatever. So, you know, we're just kind of launching all this now and talking about just the different realms of possibility, which are just incredible. So let's get this contender out on the field to take on abrupt climate change. Let's do it. What are we waiting for?
Nopium.
All right. Shall we stop recording? Shall we let our viewers off the hook, and then we can chat about other things?
Yeah.
All right. Great. Well, thanks everyone so much for watching, and look forward to seeing you on future broadcasts. And feel free to join the conversation. In the meantime, look forward to your comments. Thank you so much, Michael in Thailand, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Arigatou gozaimasu.